Michael Cooper is the CEO of Dream REIT, major player in office properties, in particular in cities like Toronto and Calgary. And Michael joining us once again here on BNN Bloomberg. Michael, always great to have you with us. Thanks for coming back. Let's talk first about your business and what you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis right now.
That's a great question, because we're spending a tremendous amount of time on things that hardly took any effort before. Collecting rent and working with our tenants is a big deal. Over the last 10 weeks, we've spoken with every tenant multiple times. We're checking in on how their businesses are, what they're able to do, and also working with them in terms of the government programs and trying to manage it. It's a complicated time. We're doing a lot of work on getting our buildings ready to reopen and communicating with our tenants about what that's going to be like. We bought 200 liters of hand sanitizer, and I think we spent $400,000 on different things to reopen. So it's a lot of grinding to get ready for what we hope will come soon. And some people will be able to come back to the office.
What is that biggest issue you find when you're talking to them, and even for your own team on the issue of reopening?
So I would say that, with a lot of our tenants, this is as big a challenge as they've ever seen. And I would say, to start with, people just need somebody to talk to. They want to know that their landlords are empathetic and are going to work with them, which we are. And then we often talk about real practical issues. But I would say, since we're an office business, a lot of our tenants are generating significant revenue. Some are fully virtual for a while and are able to generate as much revenue as before or close. So overall, it's not bad with most of our tenants. We've got about 6% retail, and about half of them are very concerned. But for the most part, the office tenants are hanging in.
So this week, obviously, we saw the federal government unveil another program, the one that's being called LEAF, where essentially larger businesses, if they need a lender of last resort, as the Prime Minister seemed to put it, can tap into some credit available through the federal government. Are you getting a sense, though, from any of those businesses that you were talking about, whether they would want to participate in a program like that to have the kind of money to go and reopen their doors or pay their rent, whatever it may be?
I mean, first, it's raiding money from Trudeau like Post Malone at a nightclub. So it's exciting to watch. And who knows if the consequences will be significant or not. But with our tenants, that program's not really designed for many of our tenants. Financial tenants are excluded, and some of our larger retail tenants may benefit from it. But for the most part, that isn't a program that's going to help us much.
Okay, and let's, as you make, I think, probably the first Post Malone reference I've heard during all of our coverage, Michael, let's talk a little bit more about the rent relief side of it. Ed Sunshine of RioCan yesterday was talking about the fact that we're basically near the midpoint of May, and that there are a lot of tenants that are still not clear when they'll be able to get money for that rent relief program. Obviously, if it's as advertised and they can get that assistance, then it could be very helpful. What are you finding in your dialogues with tenants on the rent relief program specifically?
Well, look, everybody's acting with great intent, almost exclusively. I think the issue there is the program was for April, May, and June. We've had 2 of the 3 rent days, April 1st and May 1st. We have tenants who aren't sure what to do. They paid rent in April. They don't know if they're supposed to pay 25% in May. We're telling our tenants that we're going to support them through the program. But we still don't have all the rules on it, so we can't tell who qualifies, what we're supposed to do. That's supposed to come out this week. I'd be surprised if there's clarity by June. So for the whole period of this program, there'll be uncertainty. We're public. We're going to have to audit our numbers. I think it's going to be hard to audit numbers June 30th when it's unclear what the programs are. But so it's definitely chaotic, and people can't figure out what they're supposed to do right now. And I'm not sure when we actually find out that we get the money, because we need to report revenue on our books at some point. For the most part, we're getting a lot of rent from our big tenants, and this is a smaller group. It's definitely beneficial, but we're just going to have to hang around the net, see when the rules come out, work with our tenants, and try to fill out the forms and get them approved.
Well, I mean, I think of other industries like airlines and the CEO of Air Canada who recently had to come out and say, look, I mean, it's going to be upwards of 3 years before we get back to some kind of normal. When you've joined us in the past, you've talked about 2022 as being a more realistic time frame for seeing a normal environment. Is that how you're feeling today, that it will take a couple of years to get back to what you would traditionally define as being normal in your industry?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can't imagine that this shock can go through the whole system by the end of 2020 for sure. So I think it's definitely going to spread into 2021. And when I say that, prior to COVID, I thought the world was changing as fast as I've ever seen. Those changes are accelerating during COVID, social changes, technology changes. Then we got everything from COVID. So, longer term, we don't know how the world's changing, and it'll take us a long time to see what they like, what they don't like, and how they're changing their life, and what it means for demand and what types of things they demand. So I think it's going to take a while. But having said that, that doesn't mean like you just sit on your hands for 2 years. I think it's an exciting time. We announced a new business that we're starting for institutional investors, and we're looking at a very interesting, changing world, and there's lots of opportunities, and we're trying to figure out where to be on that.
Why? What gives you the confidence to be able to launch a new business when you're dealing with all this uncertainty?
Well, I think, firstly, we've managed a lot of things relatively well coming into COVID. We sold a big company and raised a lot of capital in December. We raised money. We sold 140 office buildings prior to this to really focus on quality. I think it's the right way to go. There's talk about negative interest rates. The interest rates are very low, tremendous amount of printing of money. And we think that means that hard assets are going to be desirable. The stock market is very, very difficult for people emotionally to handle. So we see more and more assets going into non-tradable assets. High quality real estate, we can see now it's in high demand, and there are trades happening at very good prices. So I think on the most part, if you pick the great assets in areas that are likely to grow, you're going to do very well over the long term. And when you have interest rates at plus or minus zero, you're going to have to find a way to make some money. And I think real estate gives lots of opportunities, number one. Number two, there is a lot of goals the government is trying to achieve. They're going to need people to help them achieve it. We've done a lot of private-public partnerships with the government to help them achieve their goals. Coming out of COVID, there's going to be a tremendous amount of money for housing and other of the government's goals, and we think there's a real business to work with them to add housing, spend the money, get people working.
Well, and you talked about that emotion in the stock market, and no doubt we have seen it in sectors like these publicly traded real estate companies like your own. I mean, we ran in our newscast this morning some comments from Ed Sunshine suggesting that the idea of distributions being cut by the major players might be a bit of a stretch. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's a really interesting comment because money's free. So if money's free, you can make your distributions. If you've got lots of access to capital, you can make distributions. So, people can make distributions as long as they have a business that has a potential for the future. I mean, it doesn't mean that they're making more money than they're distributing. So I think we're going to see different companies making different strategies. Our preference is to have a low distribution. It gives us a lot more flexibility. But I think there will be companies that are going to make more than they distribute. There's companies that are going to distribute what they always distributed. And there will be companies that will cut their distributions because it's the best way to manage the long term.
Michael, you talked about the relationship with you and the tenants and helping them through this time, but you've also been cautious about, how far one goes with a tenant if that tenant is troubled. There's been a growing amount of commentary out there. Could you see some of the real estate players take, for example, equity stakes in some of their tenant partners? What would you say about something like that?
I mean, that's really interesting because prior to COVID, we were thinking that maybe we need to have more of a financial interest in hospitality because we need a lot of restaurants in our most exciting developments. Equinox is owned by a real estate company, and so is SoulCycle. And, I think that being able to provide a great experience to your customers and in your neighborhood is a big deal. So I think there's a reason why landlords might want to have an interest in the amenities for their tenants. Prior to this, with this, maybe. I think we're probably more likely, if needed, to help support restaurants reopen. They're very important for our tenants. We want our buildings to be full, certainly on the ground floor, and make our experience the best we can. So we'll definitely support our tenants through this. I'm not sure that we have an equity interest unless we see a really wonderful opportunity to grow the business. But we're not going to keep them afloat because that's just good for the rent. We'd only do that if we love what they're doing.